All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are tackling a huge one, maybe one of the biggest questions in the entire Bible. What does it actually cost to follow Christ? It all starts with just two words: follow me. I mean, it sounds so simple, right? But it's this incredibly direct command that asks for, well, everything. As you see it in the Gospel of Mark, it's just so stark, so absolute. It's a call that demands a choice, right then and there, a choice that's going to change your entire life. And that's a seriously powerful question, isn't it? Before we even dive into what the texts say, just think about that for a second. If you heard that call today, right now, what would it actually take for you to drop everything? What would you have to walk away from? Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the price of a promise. Then, the burdens of a crown. After that, the radical demand from Christ himself, what it actually looked like when people lived it out, and we'll finish with the ultimate exchange. Okay, first up, the price of a promise. You know, this whole idea of faith having a cost, it didn't just start with Jesus. Nope, it goes way back to some of the earliest figures in the story, people who were asked to pay a massive price for a promise they couldn't even see yet. So let's talk about a guy named Abram in the book of Genesis. He gets this command: just leave. Leave your home, your family, literally all the security you've ever known, and go somewhere else, an unknown land. This is really the first time we see the costs spelled out so clearly, a total uprooting of your life based on nothing but faith. And here's the thing about Abraham. His commitment wasn't just a one-and-done deal. It was this lifelong process where the sacrifice just kept getting bigger and bigger. As you can see, first he has to leave his country. Then he has to live as a total outsider, a foreigner. And finally, he's called to obey, without any exceptions. The cost just keeps going up. All right, let's move on to the burdens of a crown. This idea of a high personal cost, it gets even more intense with one of the most complicated figures in the whole Bible. And this is where we start to see that the price isn't just about what you give up, it's also about the heavy burdens you have to carry. So in 2 Samuel, we meet David. He starts out as a shepherd, and then bam, he's anointed king. The text says he was chosen by God for greatness, promised a kingdom, a legacy, the whole shebang. I mean, on the surface, this sounds like a massive win, right? All gain. But that promise came with an incredibly heavy burden. David's life was just filled with personal tragedy and some pretty catastrophic moral failures. We're talking about everything from betrayal and murder all the way to a full-blown rebellion led by his own son, Abselum. The cost here wasn't paid in gold, it was paid in heartbreak and relationships. And this quote, wow, that's not a king speaking. That is a completely broken father. This one moment just perfectly captures the devastating personal cost of his choices and his power. It's the real, crushing weight of that crown. Okay, so all of that brings us to the absolute core of this explainer: the radical demand. This is the moment Jesus comes on the scene and makes the cost of following him crystal clear. And it's way more radical than anything that came before. There's a story in Mark's gospel about a rich young ruler, and it really gives us the sharpest definition of this new cost. So this guy comes to Jesus, and honestly, he sounds like a great dude. He's followed the commandments his entire life. He's basically done everything by the book. But Jesus' response just flips the script completely. It's not about following the rules anymore. It's about something else: a complete, total surrender. Surrender of your wealth, your security, even your identity. He's asking this guy to give up the one thing that defined who he was. And for this man, that price was just too high. The comfort, the security that came with all his stuff, in the end, that was more valuable to him than following Jesus. He just couldn't make that trade. And Jesus frames this choice in the starkest terms imaginable. He basically asks, what good is it to gain the whole world but lose your own soul? I mean, what an incredible question. It forces you to completely rethink what profit and loss even mean. So that leads to a pretty big question, right? What did this actually look like in practice? What happened to the people who did accept this crazy radical call? The ones who heard the command, looked at the cost, and said, okay, I'm in. Well, the book of Acts and the letters from the apostles, they paint a really vivid and, let's be honest, often brutal picture of what life was like for them. It was definitely not a life of ease. We're talking about constant hardship, persecution, getting thrown in prison, a life of total self-sacrifice. They even use this phrase, being poured out like an offering for other people. But here's the twist. The story in the Bible doesn't just end with loss. It completely reframes this whole idea of cost into something else. It's this paradoxical, almost hard to believe idea of an exchange. So here's the concept of the exchange. The cost of following Christ is always framed as trading something of temporary earthly value, like possessions, security, even your own life, for something of eternal heavenly value. It's not about losing something, it's about trading up, exchanging the lesser for the infinitely greater. And this brings us full circle, right back to that rich young ruler. Remember the promise Jesus made him? You will have treasure in heaven. His material loss, which seemed so huge, would have been replaced by something way more valuable. That was the deal on the table. That was the exchange he was offered, and the one he couldn't bring himself to accept. And so the text leaves us with this final, really provocative question. What will a man give in exchange for his soul? It just kind of hangs there, right? It forces you to ask yourself what you truly value, and it reframes this entire conversation. It's not about what do I have to give up, but maybe what do I stand to gain, and what is that worth to me?